Welcome to Don't Get Rusty, where we have fun talking about the things that help keep you proficient. Today we have a special guest, an aviation celebrity, Rob Machado, who is with us, and he's going to be introduced in just a second. But before we get going with that, I'm just going to say very quickly that we encourage interaction. We have people standing by ready to answer your questions, and if you have a good question, no pressure, it will actually be answered on the air. And so Pablo and Steven, say hi.
Hi.
Steven is our producer. He's in the background helping keeping everything running smoothly. And so I will first answer the most important question that we get over and over during every broadcast.
What's
and
that,
that is,
Keith?
well, what is that? It's like, do we get wings credit? And the answer is yes, you do get wings credit. And you know what you have to do? Nothing. If you actually register with this webinar with the same email address that you use for your FAA Fast Team Wings email, then it will be automatic. You actually have to do nothing. And so don't worry about that at all. And also, yes, too, this webinar will be available on recording. So if you look at the AOPA Live YouTube channel in about 24 hours, then you will see the recording of this webinar. And so my name is Keith West. I work at AOPA. I am a flight instructor, and what I do at AOPA is that I work with flight schools to help deliver a better flight training experience. Totally dedicated to flight training, as we all are here at AOPA. And my colleague, Pablo Morelli. Pablo, introduce yourself, buddy.
Hello, everybody. Pablo Morelli, Senior Director of Flight Technology. It's great to be here. Usually we're in the other order, but I got to say, both Keith and I are very happy to say Chris gets to introduce our very famous guest here. Chris?
Hey. Hi. So yes, I am thrilled. It's Chris Moser, and I also work at AOPA, and I'm a flight instructor. And I have the distinct honor of getting to introduce one of my favorite aviation authors, if not my favorite, Rod Machado. And I know he is the proud owner of a Cessna 150, where he breaks subsonic slow flight records all across the board. So Rod, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chris. That's very kind. It's a pleasure to be here with you folks. You're a great group of guys, and unfortunately, Stephen doesn't have a SAG card, so he can't get on the video. And someday we'll give him one. And but thank you, Chris. That's very, very kind. Yes, I have a Cessna 150 that, as I tell everybody, it only has 2 throttle settings: fly, no fly, and that's it. It's fly, no fly, and sometimes it's no fly, no fly. It doesn't matter which way you push it. And it's an airplane I use for training and for fun, and I really do enjoy it very, very much. And let me mention this, if I may. 4 years ago, I stopped writing for AOPA, and I do miss writing very, very much. And I did that for one very important reason. And I'm saying this for all the people that haven't read their magazines in 4 years. And honest, I had a guy, I'm not kidding. A couple weeks ago, he wrote and he said, I didn't see your article in AOPA Pilot this month. And I said, I'm catching up on my reading. He's catching up on 4 years worth of reading. So apparently he's missed quite a bit.
What of a fine.
So, it's very strange. But anyway, so, I did that so I could work on my business. And that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years, focusing on writing e-learning courses, developing e-learning courses, and working on more educational materials, videos, and things like that. And it's just fun. Aviation is just a fun place to be. But I do miss writing for AOPA. It was one of the most enjoyable 18-year experiences I've ever had. So that's it. And you guys are with a great organization too, obviously. So.
Well, thanks, Rod. Yeah, we appreciate that, and we certainly miss your writing in the article as well. But I know you've got some amazing stuff. You're going to share some really cool stuff with us today, and I know that I know Keith and I'll be doing our plugs for the awesome books that Rod creates. But also, I know you got some good online content as well, so check it out on YouTube.
You're very kind. Thank you. You're very, very kind.
Well, and I got in all seriousness, I mean, you do have like some of the best, I think, like the go-to references that Chris and I use, because we have both worked on creating the high school curriculum for aviation, AOPA exact. And so, when we have a question, yours is one of the first references we turn to. And I tell you, all of my instrument students, one of your courses that I really love is the instrument scan course, where you talk about the scan, and I think I haven't found any other resource that describes it in such, in such helpful detail. Let me put that. But
that's very kind. Well, I'll give you 3,000 hours to stop talking like that. That was so nice of you. I do appreciate it very, very,
well,
very,
and
very
that's
much.
why you're here. But we're going to turn it over to you, Rod, and you're gonna be talking about things to help keep people proficient, right? Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And let me just say, just to be a good citizen here, I always wear my mask. I was going to wear it today just in case my computer got a virus, but I decided not to. And it is again, it's a pleasure to be here. Let me start off my program today, and what my intent is through our program here is to give the folks out there some idea of what they can do to keep themselves proficient, given the fact that we've been under lockdown during this zombie apocalypse. And it is I don't know any better way to explain it than that. It's kind of like a zombie apocalypse light with this COVID virus. But so many people can't get back into the airplane until, or if they get back in the airplane, 3, 4, 5, 6 months will pass. So I want to add a little insight as to what the best way is in order to get back into the airplane and perhaps improve your performance without having to spend a whole bunch of money in an airplane, because that can be very expensive trying to regain your skill and proficiency. So we'll discuss that. But let me start off by saying that no matter who you are, and that includes me, and that includes everybody else, in my opinion, we can always benefit by having somebody else look at our performance and critiquing that performance in an honest, reasonable way. And if you have somebody that can give you that kind of critique, you gain so much from it. And again, I've been very fortunate to have friends, highly experienced friends, and I've been flying now for 50 years, instructing for 48, and I'm always learning something from people. I keep a very open mind about it. Whenever I get in an airplane, and I kid you not, I'm not making this up, I'm saving the stuff I make up at the end of the show, and then I'll be making a bunch of stuff up. But right now, when I get in an airplane with somebody, I look over at them and I say, listen, I want you to do 2 things. Number 1, I want you to go ahead and watch the Hobbs meter. If it overspeeds, let me know, and we'll make an emergency descent and land as soon as we can. The second thing I do is I say, if you see that I'm doing anything unusual, wrong, strange, or that you think I can improve upon, feel free to make a comment. And you have to keep an open mind like that. And, sometimes you just get into bad habits, and you benefit by having people help you improve. It's good having an observer on occasion. And my wife is always willing to do that whenever I'm flying. So she helps me. Hey, what's that? And I said, that's the altimeter. She says, it moved a little bit. I said, the altimeter setting just changed. Look, it's back where it is supposed to be right now. So we do that all the time in the airplane. But I was flying with somebody out of San Diego a couple of years ago in his A36 Bonanza out of Montgomery Field. Now, you don't have to make this stuff up. Again, that comes toward the end of the program. We're climbing out. As we're climbing out, he reaches over, raises the gear, and I kid you not, as the gear comes up and is tucked in the belly, his feet come underneath the seat and tuck underneath the seat on climb out. He's sitting there in what looks like the lotus position. He's in a yoga position on climb out, as if he's meditating, as if that's supposed to be a good thing to do on climb out. And I look at that and I go, no, 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 no. I look over at him and I say, excuse me, lotus blossom. I said, where are your feet supposed to be? And he looked and goes, I said, use your words. And I said, what about putting them on those pedals with the bright, shiny wax that still is on them, just like it was when it left the factory? And he is oblivious to the fact that he needed to use rudder on climb out. And so that was an interesting thing. So we flew, and because I like flying, and we gave him some great experience to help him with the the idea of flying, keeping control of the airplane. That means using all the flight controls. The second story is, just before the COVID crisis struck, and I think this was in December, I flew with a fellow on a flight review in a Cessna 150. It was a Cessna 150 Land-O-Matic, by the way. And By the way, that was originally the name for the Cessna 150, in case you are not aware of that. That was in the publication, Cessna 150 Land-O-Matic, until the lawyers got a look at that and looked at it very carefully and realized, there's nothing Land-O-Matic about this airplane. You know, you've got to land it yourself. So we are in the practice area, and I said, Bob, give me a departure stall. We'll call him Bob because that was his name. And so Bob takes the airplane, puts the power in. Now, normally you can do this with 65% power, but it's a Cessna 150, so it doesn't make any difference whether it's full throttle or throttle back. You know, you're not getting 65% power. You are. But anyway, so we come up, as we're coming up to do the departure stall, he establishes the attitude. Folks, I see that ball moving to the right. And that little ball in the inclinometer is moving to the right. I'm feeling it on my rear end. Airplane wants to yaw to the left. He's taking the controls, turning the controls to the right. And I'm going, no, 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 no. And I go, here we go. So I tighten my seatbelt, shoulder harness, pull my seatbelt tight. And folks, as we got up to the top, airplane stalls and pew, airplane rolls right into a spin. Now, I could have prevented that, but sometimes there's a reason for letting or allowing a student to enter a spin like that. He was a rated pilot. He had some experience. So this is not new to him, and it shouldn't be new to him. So anyway, the airplane's spinning down through the practice area. And, you know, I said, Bob, is it a good idea to keep, you know, this is what you wanted to do? What do you intend to do? And he goes, I'm going to let you fly. So I took the controls, recovered. But the sense of how to keep control of the airplane was not something he was thinking about. It's not something he was trained to do. And that's a very important thing. And he benefited from having somebody watch his performance, as we all can. And here's the deal. When people fly airplanes and they tuck their feet underneath the seat, or they don't use rudder to properly control the airplane, to keep the nose pointed in the direction the airplane is actually going, what happens is they start to lose confidence in their ability because they can't predict what the airplane's supposed to do, or what the airplane is going to do. And it's the ability to predict what the airplane's going to do ultimately determines our confidence level. And that's the key. So you think, okay, what is it that makes an airplane or a pilot or allows a pilot to more properly predict what an airplane's going to do? And if I may be reductionistic here, let me say that you can kind of break it down into two categories. Pilots that fly attitude, in other words, fly by looking outside, are far, far better at being able to predict what the airplane will do versus what I call panel pilots, and that's their antithetical counterpart. Panel pilots are people that focus on the instruments, and there are a lot of beautiful instruments to look at in airplanes nowadays, especially with the widescreen TVs we have in airplanes and the other fancy built-in instruments that we put in there, or we install in there, and it's beautiful to look at. It's like Christmas every day in some Cessna 172s or 182s or larger aircraft. And attitude pilots, though, are pilots that don't have to look at the panel to find out what the heck is going on. Now think about it. Who are some of the most confident pilots you know? Let's see. Aerobatic pilots, maybe? Why was an aerobatic pilot? What's that? Chris, are you an aerobatic pilot?
Sometimes when students get me there, yes.
Oh yeah, it happens all the time. Okay, so every day is aerobatics in the practice area with students sometimes, especially doing full flap stalls when they don't stall coordinated. But
hey, so real quick, Rod, I apologize, I want to interrupt, but there's been a couple of people that have asked if this is they can't see the presentation or whatever. So just so everyone who's on, this is audio only today. Rod is speaking from his heart. Who was?
I tell you what, I'll project mentally because I'm psychotic.
Give us a hologram. So,
right. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, hand puppets work well. But anyway, the point there is that aerobatic pilots are confident because they fly attitude. And that if that doesn't strike you as being so incredibly logical, and then I don't know what will. But panel pilots, not instrument pilots, but panel pilots are people that panel pilots are people that need the instrumentation to tell them what the airplane's doing. There's a problem with that, which I'll explain it in a second. But by flying attitude, you become a far more confident pilot. Now, I'm talking about attitude flying. And that idea sometimes is an idea that most many pilots, I won't say most, but many pilots are not familiar with. And because they've never had it expressed this way, they've never had somebody talk about it in a way that makes sense to them. And again, I'll show you on what it means to be, or how to be, an attitude pilot shortly. But right now, the most important thing is that I can tell whether you're an attitude pilot or whether you're a panel pilot, somebody that needs their instruments in order to be able to fly their airplane, by doing one thing. If you fly with me, then I'll cover the instruments while we're downwind in the traffic pattern and have you land the airplane. And if you can land the airplane with some degree of aplomb, poise, and confidence, without yelling, screaming, asking what the number for 911 is, and doing all kind of crazy gyrations there, then I know you're an attitude pilot, because attitude pilots don't need their instruments to fly the airplane. But if, as happened at John Wayne Airport, AKA Orange County, this happened 25 years ago, a guy in a Comanche 250 turned downwind. I happened to be on the ground holding for takeoff, and I hear this, tower, this is Comanche 34 Papa, emergency, emergency. I'm thinking, oh no, a pilot's in trouble. That gets my attention quick. So I'm listening, and the controller says, what's the nature of the emergency? And the guy goes, and I'm not making this up, the guy goes, my airspeed has failed, airspeed failure, warning, mayday. And his airspeed failed. I'm thinking, that's not an emergency. That's training every day with my students at John Wayne Airport, AKA Orange County. But it gives you an idea. There's a man that relied on instruments for his flying. By the way, I did this with one student, and I've told this story before, but it's a good story. I distracted her, as I do all my students in the downwind. I tell them, look, Barbara, there's a balloon out there doing a bag over, and she'll look out for the balloon, doing an aerobatic maneuver, a bag over, a confident balloon pilot, I might add. And he'll look out there, and I take my no peeky and I just kind of wet it a little bit of saliva. The no peeky is basically a soap dish holder with 50 suction cups on it, and boom, right there on the airspeed indicator. And Barbara looks back, and she looks over and she goes, oh, no. I said, yes. She said, what is that for? And I said, that's to simulate airspeed failure. And she looks at me and goes, like that. I look away, and all of a sudden she reaches over, pulls it off the airspeed indicator, and I hear all those suction cups releasing from the glass. I look back, she's holding it up, looking at me, giving me the, that evil eye. And I said, what did you do that for? She said, I simulated fixing it. So that is what you got to be careful whenever you're flying with students, because they do things like that. And anyway, I have to say that the FAA is partially responsible for, and several major universities, for promoting this idea of emphasis on instruments. Now, again, I'm not anti-FAA or any major aviation university. Of course, I'm a big supporter of both of those groups whenever they do things right. I'm not a fan of bad ideas. And many years ago, I think it was about 15 years ago, in conjunction with a major university, there was a move afoot to create the combination private and instrument rating. And therefore, you'd start on your private and you'd work on instrument training at the same time. When you took a look at the syllabus for this thing, it looked like the code for the navigational system on a Boeing 777. It was insane. But on the 6th lesson, right there in the syllabus, if you could find it between the other lines of code, you would actually see fly ILS approach. And so you'd start on an ILS approach on the 6th lesson. And I'm thinking that's amazing. That is a bad idea. That's like opening a restaurant and naming it Hitler's Fish and Chips. Who would eat there? No one would. I mean, it's just a bad name to name a restaurant. Bad idea. This was a bad idea. And as a result, one of the instructors at the universities that was using this syllabus said to me, yeah, my students could fly an instrument approach, but they just couldn't land.
Yeah.
So that gives you an idea that when you're dealing with a syllabus or a different syllabi that teach a reliance on instruments versus attitude flying, that's a problem. And that's what you get. And essentially several students in that university were unable to fly and lost a great deal of money as a result. And it was a real shame because it did not help those students out. Anyway, the point is that one has to learn to develop a reliance on attitude versus instruments. That is so fundamental. So here's the deal with attitude flying. And then I'm going to show you a video. And by the way, Keith, could we actually show video number 2 first? Is that possible versus?
Yes, we can. Just
okay.
Tell me when you're ready.
Okay, very good. Not yet. In just a second here, but the thing is, if you're going to use your instruments to tell you what the airplane's doing, you have to do 3 things. You have to be able to scan the instruments, you have to be able to interpret them, and then you have to be able to apply what you've scanned and interpreted in terms of control of the airplane. Those are the 3 pillars and fundamentals of attitude or of instrument flying. Now, if you were to do that when you fly, think about this. If you have to rely on those instruments, you have to keep moving your eyes, look at the instruments. Maybe you look outside on occasion, and hopefully more than on occasion. But you're taking what you see and you're converting that into the mental picture of flying an airplane. The problem is, that's why people study 40 hours to become an instrument pilot, because it takes a long time to learn how to do that. And just like when you take your 3 hours for primary training on instruments, the instructor tells you, now I want you to forget everything you're feeling, forget your physical sensations, and pay attention to the instruments. And of course, they should be more specific about that. They're not talking about forgetting the sensations of pain, hunger, and loneliness. They're talking about the physical sensations of the seat of your pants and the discombobulation you get from spatial disorientation. So the deal is, it's antithetical to flying attitude. And therefore, then you couple that, by the way, with the FAA's emphasis on integrated flight instruction, which is not where you bus students from one airport to the next. I'm talking about you introduce a maneuver, visually introduce it on instruments, and then introduce it visually again. Sometimes the emphasis is placed on instrument flying rather than visual flying. So students lose focus on that. And therefore, when we wonder why pilots aren't as confident, it's because it's the lack of predictability of what their airplane will do, because they, in a sense, don't know how to get the big picture fast enough. Looking outside gives you the big picture almost immediately. So what does it mean to fly attitude or be an attitude pilot? How do pilots like aerobatic pilots fly attitude? Well, actually pretty simple, because being an attitude pilot involves one little equation. And I'm going to give you a math equation. Is that okay? Is it okay to actually discuss?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because math is hard. Five out of four people have trouble with math. I mean, according to the stats. And I was reading USA Today that said, 56% of the people have trouble doing math equations. And I'm thinking, man, imagine that, nearly 20%. That is truly phenomenal. So take some time in that. Some of these are just for me, by the way. So there are only 5 attitudes you have to remember or use when flying attitude, using basic attitude flying concepts. And the equation is attitude plus power equals performance. Now, I want to be very, very careful about this. And would you guys mind if I do a psychological intervention experiment with you? Could I do this?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I mind.
Excellent, Pablo. I knew you volunteered. Take your finger and put it in one ear underneath your earpiece right there. Can you just do that? Yeah, go ahead, Pablo. Take your time on that. And no,
like this?
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much. Because what I'm about to say is so important, I don't want it to go in one ear and out the other. So take your finger out now. There are people from my last webinar with their finger still in their ear, so you could take it out. So the deal is that it's attitude plus power, not attitude plus throttle position. That is very important, because full throttle, especially in my Cessna 150 Landomatic, doesn't always mean you're getting full power, full producible power if you're at 10,000 feet, an altitude my 150 has never seen. So attitude plus power equals performance. That is the key. So let's go ahead, Keith, if we can, and roll video number 2. And this is the basis of attitude flying or stick and rudder flying.
It's also a philosophy of flying that simplifies airplane control, given that almost all your flying will use one of 5 different attitude and power setting combinations. Here's a handy aid that my friend Ralph Butcher uses to identify these attitudes. And when I say handy, I mean it involves an actual hand. Take a look at this. By placing your ring finger parallel to the earth, your thumb represents the attitude for best angle of climb. Now, it's an approximation, or you might say it's a rule of thumb. Your pointer finger represents the attitude for best rate of climb. Your middle finger represents the attitude for cruise flight, which keeps the cockpit level while the wing sits at about a 3-degree angle of attack. Your ring finger represents the attitude for best glide, which keeps the wing's chord line nearly level with the horizon and the fuselage pointed down about 3 degrees below the horizon. Yes, the chord line is level with the horizon on most airplanes during a power-off glide at best glide speed. Remember, the relative wind is striking the wing at a larger angle even with the chord level with the horizon because the airplane is descending in this instance. Finally, your pinky represents the attitude for the power-off approach speed on final approach with your typical flap setting applied. Now, this is just a handy memory aid, but it is a technically advanced one. You might say it's a digital one. So, make flying less complicated by keeping these attitudes and power settings in mind.
On that video.
All right.
Yes,
Yeah. Go ahead, Rod.
I was going to say you are on mute. Sorry about that.
Well, let me. Is Rod on move? Okay. You know, when I learned to fly in the early '80s, that's one of the things we got. It was power plus attitude equals performance, and quite honestly, it took me 20 years to understand that. But you know,
Keith, what do you think the issue was with that? And in other words, why did your instructor not emphasize that enough, or did?
I don't know. I thought I had a great instructor, but I just think that I was unwilling to actually sit and think about what it actually meant, because you kind of get turned off by mathematical formulas, but until you sit and think, what does this actually mean?
Yes.
It just didn't sink in deep.
No,
And I think we've gotten away from that now, because I teach that to my students now, but I never hear that practically in any other context.
No, it's very rare to hear at the airport, and I run in those circles where you instructors know those things, but they don't emphasize that. It's always on takeoff. First thing you do is you pitch up and look at the airspeed indicator to get the attitude that you want, but you shouldn't have to do that. Again, with those 5 attitudes, when you pitch up, for example, on the takeoff, apply power and you sense. This is what I do. I apply power, look at the engine instruments to make sure that they're all in the green and where they should be. Then I look right and left to make sure nothing's coming off the airplane. And when I say nothing's coming off the airplane, I'm talking about fuel streaming out of the right tank of the airplane, which I've had happen when I trusted a gas boy many years ago excuse me, human fuel resource manager to make sure that there was the gas caps were on properly. And I've had, let's see, I've seen the pager fall off it was on the nose of the airplane, my pager, and it felt, because as I'm looking to the right, I see my pager falling down, and I left it on the nose of the airplane. Fortunately, it landed on the center line, and for 2 weeks it rested there, and it wasn't damaged because it fell on the line. And then I finally got it back. And so you accelerate, you feel the acceleration. If you don't feel it, you pull the throttle back and you stop the takeoff. Simple as that. You have to sense how fast your airplane's accelerating, whether it's normal. And then when the airplane feels like it's ready to fly, and you can take a quick glance at the airspeed, it should be somewhere up approaching the green, beginning of the green arc. You rotate and you look at the attitude and you place it in the attitude, and then you get the attitude you want for acceleration, climb attitude, and then trim. It's attitude, power, and trim for every maneuver that you make. And if a pilot were to think on every maneuver he or she makes that when going from one attitude to the next, climb to a bank, to a turn, to a descent, climbing turn, descending turn, attitude, power, and trim, then you put yourself in a position where you are always looking outside. You never have to look at the instruments to confirm what the airplane's doing. That is such a confidence building exercise. And when you say, Keith, a great observation, why is it that would be something that we wouldn't normally think of. Like we hear about, but we don't emphasize it, we don't use it. And I think the emphasis is on, for precision flying, we've got to fly, you know, proper airspeed, proper altitude. Yes, you have to do that. And that emphasis, by the way, is made even more so when you're flying with a primary flight display, because you're looking at numbers now instead of an analog needle. So this reinforces the idea of, you know, got to keep everything proper and precise, which is good, but you can do that with basic attitude flying. And a good example of that is, I know all three of you folks can probably make steep turns and hold your altitude within 20 to 50 feet, within 20 feet, with a definable horizon without ever having to look inside the airplane. Would you agree with that? Of course you can.
Do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Rod, I'm sorry to interrupt, but apparently there was a lot of video problems for whatever reason. A lot of people couldn't hear it, even at the highest volume. Secondly, a lot of people had it either shut off or not start. And I've had at least 3 just come in now that say, can he tell us what the middle finger's for?
No, it's not the middle finger. No, no, you got to strike that. It'll be my last AOPA webinar. If that's the only thing people remember.
Yeah. So, well, they're asking pinky, middle finger.
Yeah,
can you tell us? And a lot of them said they just cut off there, and they just don't. They're like, what happened to the finger?
Yeah, right, really. You know, this is why it's important to put gasoline in the home generator. But anyway, this is that's just me. This is the best angle of climb, best rate of climb, cruise, best glide speed, and approach right here. These are the attitudes. And for cruise, it's almost a level attitude because the airplane has a built-in 3-degree, 4-degree angle of attack, the angle of incidence. And this is the attitude right here for best glide, where the chord line is almost level with the horizon. And but remember, the chord line is level with the horizon because it has a 4-degree, 3 to 4 degree angle of attack, angle above the nose down attitude here. So you point the nose down for best glide, and that the wings are almost perfectly level with the horizon. Excuse me, the chord line is almost perfectly level with the horizon. And when you put flaps in, that's typically the attitude for your approach attitude with some degrees of flaps in. I did have a guy come up at the seminar one time, and he actually did this. He only had 2 fingers. He said, you know, yeah, I felt bad for the guy. He only had 2 fingers, but at least he had 2. And he said, well, what about me? What kind of attitude pilot will I be? I said, well, you'll make a great glider pilot right here, because that's the best glide attitude. And you're qualified to fly the space shuttle right here. So that's it. But we're going to have to bend this one down here a little bit more. Anyway, that was the strange experience I had with. And by the way, you can tell the people here, tell everybody who's watching that this will be on the video that will be on YouTube, and so you know they can find it there if they missed it. I'm sorry they're having trouble with that.
You know, I will say that somebody said that they're 64 years old, and the finger explanation is one of the best things I have seen. So
that was my wife. Yeah, she's not going to be happy with her age, but that is no. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you to say. So let's see. Let me show how this works. And by the way, one more thing here too. You have to think about attitude, stop the reliance on instruments. And I might suggest that you go up with a flight instructor, although you can do this. Now, I tell you what, I have to be careful here because I have a lot of faith in my average fellow pilot, but I know that there are some folks out there that might do this wrong. I was going to say that go ahead, try it at the airport. Put a no peeky over the airspeed indicator, then practice landing the airplane. Better to do that with a flight instructor if you're not comfortable doing that, which most people might not be. Do it with a flight instructor and have them cover up or her cover up the panel instruments and make landings. What incredible comforting maneuver that is once you build experience at that, because you can fly by attitude. And it's quite a jump for most people, but what a confidence builder. Second thing is trim. And I cannot tell you how important trim is, because the emphasis of flying an airplane, the emphasis I place when a student is flying an airplane, I place emphasis on maximum efficiency with minimum effort. And this is not, the lazy man's guide to flying. This is a way with minimum effort to be able to have more time to think about what's going on in the cockpit around you, to think in terms of collecting, connecting, and conveying, which is what pilots should do in an aircraft. Flying should be a reflexive behavior, the physical skills of flying an airplane. And in many cases, it's not. In many cases, pilots are spending too much time thinking about physically flying the airplane, and that should be reflexive. And if it's not, and then ATC makes demands on you, for example, then all of a sudden now you find you can't properly fly. And a good analogy of that is using a cell phone. Carnegie Mellon University in their cognitive neuroscience department came up with an interesting observation about how use of a cell phone detracts from the consciousness we apply to driving a car. And the folks at Carnegie Mellon know something about how we think because the university has the word melon in it. So, they know how to use their melon, I think. They said when you use a cell phone, hands free or with the earpiece, they say it is a 34% drain on cognitive resources. Isn't that something? So even though you can drive a car reflexively, using a cell phone is a drain on cognitive resources. Well, just imagine if you're in an airplane and your flying's not reflexive, and then ATC asks you for information, and you can't say standby because you've said it 35 times already, and now you could find yourself behind the airplane. And although it's almost impossible to get behind a Cessna 150 because of the slow speed it flies, nevertheless, you don't want that to happen to you. So Trent,
Rod, one of our commenters, Bonnie Sue, said, I had to memorize all configurations when I started flying, and it took me many years to stop thinking. When I try to use the left brain, I get confused as what I should do and why. The analogy I'll make was with dancing. If you've ever taken a dancing, like ballroom dancing class, if you're thinking 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you get so confused that you can't really do it. You just gotta let yourself go, and it kind of becomes something that's instinctive.
It's a great observation. Exactly. And I've always found my dance partner gets really upset when I keep saying 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And I might also add too, I don't dance anymore at my advanced stage. I don't do that, mainly because it's embarrassing when people come up looking for my medic alert bracelet. So I decided I'm done with dancing. I'll let other people like you young fellas, I'll just watch you dance. But the point is, when Bonnie said, having to stop thinking, what she's actually saying was she got to the point where she could operate reflexively. And that's very important. And by the way, you're not getting to that point if you're a panel pilot. You will get to that point if you are an attitude flying pilot, because you have 5 attitudes. I mean, there are only 5 basic configurations plus the power and the trim configuration. By the way, what most people don't realize is you don't even have to look at the tachometer as an example. If you put the airplane in a climb, attitude, power, your ears will tell you whether you have enough power or not, or whether you're getting the initial power to establish the initial climb. So we don't rely on that sense, but that's an attitude flying sense, and therefore something you want to develop too.
So Rod, when I take my students up early stage, I tell them, look, there's only 3 things that you have to worry about on this flight. 1 is controlling the attitude. 2 is always be trimming, and 3 is scan. Don't focus on one thing, And so, because I believe that cognitive load, that what you're talking about, people only have a certain amount of information that they can take in, and so you just have to limit, what you're focusing on, is my belief. What do you?
I tell you, you are now my new best friend. Really, I'm calling Buzz Aldrin and telling him he's number 2 now. Really,
Chris, you didn't mean that. Don't take it personally.
Take that, Chris.
Good, Chris. I'm going to elevate you back up to number 1 as soon as I'm done stroking Chris or Keith here. But the deal of limited bandwidth is such a fascinating concept, because there was a wonderful book written called The Fire Within, and oh my gosh, it's not back here. These are all rental books anyway. I got to go back to the library in about an hour. But it was a wonderful book, and the gentleman who wrote it said that ultimately, when you look at the bandwidth of human consciousness, we can remember 7 bits of information at one time. In other words, that was an observation made by a psychologist many years ago, that 7 to 9 bits of information is what we can recall in short-term memory. When you convert that to binary digits, 0 and 1, that's basically 2.3 bits of information. In other words, 2 to the 3rd power bits of information Yeah, 2 to the 0.8 power, excuse me. So basically, it's 7 bits of information. The bandwidth is so small in human consciousness that it's easy to get overloaded. And when people talk about, hey, I'm multitask. No, you don't. One of the biggest misconceptions in all of aviation is multitasking, in the sense of dividing consciousness as a pie. 100% of the pie goes here and another 100% can go here. No, a slice goes here and a bigger slice may go there, but your time sharing is what you're doing. There is no sharing of equal amounts of consciousness in that case. And so consequently, it's easy to get overloaded, which is why the word standby is such a powerful word here in aviation.
Rob, we have just a handful of minutes here before we go to taking questions. Did you want to roll another video? I mean, I'm really eager to see the one on trim. If you
yeah, exactly. I'm having so much fun with you folks. It's amazing. I could talk to you guys all day. Oh, I mean, everybody else who's listening too, but it is it's amazing. Let's do this. Let me show you what I do in the traffic pattern. We're going to play 2 more videos here. One, okay. Let's run the video number 1, trimming for hands-off flying. This is me in the Orange County traffic pattern, and I want to show you how valuable trim is. And I want you to watch how I use the trim when I turn base, because I don't mess around with the trim. I move the trim in a very aggressive manner. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm on downwind now at John Wayne Airport, and I've reduced power, carb heat on. I'm turning base, and watch as I pull the power back. I'll establish the attitude. Look at that trim. I just made, in this case, looks like 5 quick twists of the trim. From experience, I know that's going to allow me to maintain that attitude right there. And that attitude for that power setting allows me to fly hands off. And that's my objective in the traffic pattern. I want to let the airplane do as much of the flying as possible. In other words, maximum efficiency with minimum effort by the pilot. And I'll do the same thing when I turn final approach. I'll establish a new power setting if necessary and a new attitude, and then I will quickly twist the trim to maintain that attitude. Again, maximum efficiency with minimum pilot effort. And if you're using the trim to maintain the attitude you see over the panel, typically you don't have to twist the trim more than 3, perhaps 4 times to keep the airplane exactly in the desired attitude.
Okay, yeah, that's, well, let's play that. Look for traffic and trim. But the look for traffic is an accelerated video that's about 4 times the normal speed. And I want to show you how I look for traffic in the airplane, but go ahead and play it. And there's no sound on this, so I'll talk you through it, okay? And what's happening here is, remember, this video is sped up about 5 times, and I'm looking for traffic. This is the way that I teach my students to look for traffic. Look, turn crosswind, and lower the nose right there. See if anybody's coming in on the 45, and turning downwind here. And attitude is established for climb. That's the attitude for level flight at 90 knots, or it's actually 80 knots downwind. And see how I'm watching for traffic. And I don't show this to be like the kamikaze pilot, the guy who has to do all this bragging ahead of time. I'm showing you this because I have a big yellow streak down my back when it comes to a collision avoidance, and I make sure I watch that trim right there. And there's the attitude for base, and that's the attitude for now 70 knots. I turn final, and then I'm going to slow it down to 65 knots, and I'm going to retrim, and this is going to take me right down to the runway. Now, the other video was right down to touchdown, but anyway, so the point there is that attitude is great, but you got to maintain the attitude that you choose. You have to use trim. Don't use trim in a wimpy manner. Trim the airplane so that the force that you feel on the airplane, on the yoke, almost disappears. It has to almost disappear because of some effect known as Weber's law, which it basically says when the force gets down to a little amount, then detecting changes in that smaller amount is far, far more difficult to do. So get rid of all the force at one time, and then trim the final trim by watching to keep the attitude where you want. It should only take 4 twists of the trim wheel to accomplish that. So that's the way that works. And by the way, let me also say this before I forget it. Number 1, you get wings credit for this program, all right? And that's not That's not buffalo wings credit at Wendy's. And I want to make sure that's clear because some people are going to try to claim wings credit at Wendy's and ask for buffalo wings. Not going to happen this time. And not yet. Maybe AOPA will work out something like that.
Some deal, yeah.
Also, number 2, the letters AOPA. AO, capital letters, AOPA. If you go to rodmachado.com, anybody watching this, all AOPA members for the next 3 days, get a 25% discount on anything in my store, anything there.
Oh, that is awesome.
That's awesome, yeah.
Thank you. This is news to us. Excellent.
That's great.
Capital letters, AOPA, that's the discount code for the next 3 days.
How do we remember that?
Remember that? See, I recommend you wear your shirt. That would be my first recommendation.
Thank you.
I know you have an AOPA tattoo on your chest underneath there, right next to the ship, right? You got to. Yeah,
it's not on his chest.
Hey, Rod. One thing I wanted to throw in too is that I know for me, like Keith, I didn't really get down this idea of attitude flying. I think it was, I'm thinking back, it was during my CFI training. I finally got a CFI that noticed that I was flying looking at the instruments, and he covered up all the instruments on me and forced me to learn how to fly steep turns and everything else. And at first it was like nerve-wracking for me, but then what I realized very quickly with him showing me all that, it was way easier to fly that way. And so now I make a point when I'm working with my students, right away I watch them, and it's like, and a lot of times the ones that fly flight sims, you can tell I cover all the stuff up and I teach them that. And so what I wanted to say was that for the folks out there that may not know how to do it, here I was, I already have my commercial certificate and still didn't know how to do it. That there's no shame in this. But it is freeing, and I think it does free up some of that cognitive load, because it is, I don't have to look at the airspeed indicator. I can look at the pitch attitude. I know what it should be. I can listen to the throttle. I know where that should be. I know exactly what it sounds like when I pull it back to 2100 now, like on going on a downwind.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
So just that thought of that this is very possible, and it will make it easier, and it's just, you just got to learn how to trust those pictures and learn them.
Well, and I got to tell you, your flight instructor, that flight instructor, sorry, Keith, he's now my new best friend. And so Keith, number 3, Chris is number 2, and he's going to be number 1 once I'm done.
Oh gosh,
sliding rank.
You're so mercurial.
All that is right in here. Okay, it's all those things are right in here with this book on how to fly.
I'll tell you seriously, I was researching for the webinar I did on landings, and I wanted that book, and I didn't have enough time to wait for it to come by mail, so I got it PDF. But I'm going to go and use that AOPA code that you give, so I can get the hard copy.
Talk to me after the seminar before you do that, okay? I'll give you a very special deal.
Okay,
anyway, so go ahead. We have questions.
Yeah, did you want to run another video, or are we done with the videos?
Well, let's see. I do have a couple of other videos. Well, let's run the coordination video.
Coordination.
Yeah, that's a good one.
All right, here we go. Remember, we're going mute, guys.
Now I'm going to use rudder and aileron in coordination. I'm going to add just enough rudder so that the nose appears to pivot about the longitudinal axis as I roll in. And that tells me that I'm using the correct amount of rudder to compensate for the adverse yaw caused by the lowered aileron on the rising wing. So I'm going to turn to the right here. I'm applying right aileron and enough right rudder so that the airplane appears to pivot about the longitudinal axis, at least until it begins turning. Now I'll come back around to the left and watch for the pivot again as I change direction. As I roll out on Dana Point, I'll use just enough rudder so that the nose doesn't yaw opposite the direction of roll. Now I'll roll to the left using enough rudder so that, once again, the nose doesn't yaw opposite the direction of roll.
All right.
And that gives you an idea, as a complement to attitude flying, is that we can actually turn coordinated without having to look at the inclinometer. And that's how you do it for entering and exiting turns. This is what they mean by flying by the seat of your pants. Assuming you guys wear pants when you fly, I recommend it. And especially on your check ride. So
Well, you know, one of the questions that we got that I recall was that somebody asking how they can learn to better use the rudder, how to do this coordination. And speaking of myself, I mean, I learned to fly in Pipers, and we really didn't require a lot of rudder input. And then I flew in the Navy jets, and so honestly, jets are easier to fly. You can fly with basically your feet on the deck. And so I honestly did not learn how to control the rudder until I learned to fly in a plane that required it, the light sport aircraft, because, you know, they get
Oh, yes.
so twisty that you have to use the rudder. And the other day I was flying with a fairly new commercial student, and he's like, well, and I said, more rudder, more rudder. And how do you know that? I said, because it's irritating when you don't have the rudder. And, you know,
Right.
if you learn to build that sense. So I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, I do. And that's exactly what the inclinometer's purpose is. Ultimately, it's a biofeedback mechanism. When the ball's out to the right, you should feel pressure on the right side of your derriere. And the more deflected the ball is to the right, the more pressure you should feel on your derriere. And thus you learn to correlate that as a means of determining whether you are flying coordinated or not. And that's why flight instructors are always saying three things: more right rudder, let go, I've got it, and do you want to pay me now? That's half of the flight instructor program in those flight schools. You got to be able to say that with authority and intensity. But yet ultimately, you can do so much, you can make so much of your flying. You can do attitude flying to such a degree, you don't even need to look at the inclinometer. And even if you had a poor sense of derriere feel, you could still fly coordinated by looking outside. So to a degree, for entering and exiting turns primarily, but yes.
So I've been watching Pablo here, and he's reading intently, so I can tell that he has a bunch of questions that he's just dying to throw at you. Is that right, Pablo?
What do you read, Pablo?
That is correct. Although part of it was the news on NBC News. Sorry, Rod. No, just kidding. Okay, so yes, there's a lot of questions. They were coming in fast and furious, so there are several landing ones, several rudder ones. So if they're not in order, I apologize.
That's okay. Just ask away.
All right. So there's some comments as well. So like this one, as a CFI, I strongly encourage students to fly other planes like a J3 Cub, where real adverse yaw is obvious. Therefore, use your feet. And so that was just a comment, and to see what the response was to that.
Even more so in gliders.
Yeah, well,
yes,
thank you, Chris, for that segue.
Good point.
2 words, glider training. Some practice in them or very simple steam gauge forces a person's head outside the cockpit. You notice attitude, the sound of wind, and of course, what those rudder pedals actually do.
Absolutely.
Agree or disagree?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, what, I mean, is that the best way though? I mean, like, I don't have a glider. I think there's a glider club near me, but is that just one of the best ways you guys see, or, you know, is it the recommended way, or do you guys think simulators and other stuff as well?
Listen, I learned to fly in tail draggers, and I'm a super big fan of tail draggers. Piper Cub requires a lot of rudder usage, but for that matter, almost any tail dragger does. So, but more so Piper Cub, and probably one airplane that doesn't require much rudder usage would be the original Cherokee 140, which Fred Wick equipped with a rudder and aileron interconnect springs, and the intent was not to use to keep people from using rudders. That was the intent for that, was to allow a pilot to basically relax his feet in cruise with a moderate application of aileron for a turn. It's not meant to be, keep your feet on the floor during traffic pattern work. So, and by the way, you just mentioned this. In Wolfgang Langewiesche's book, Stick and Rudder, in 1942, he said, in 10 years, we will not have rudder pedals in airplanes, because pilots won't need rudder pedals, right in a stick and rudder. And the reason for that is the Air Coupe was an airplane developed by Fred Wick, one of the most amazing airplanes I've ever flown. I love that airplane. It doesn't have rudder pedals. One version does, but they don't do anything. And the Air Coupe basically was considered to be the ultimate airplane of the time. And Wolfgang Langewiesche realized its potential, and thus made that prognostication on that. Never came true. And why did that not happen? Number of reasons, but that's for a different seminar.
Okay. All right. So this is, you'll notice why this one was an obvious one I had to mention. Nice job as always, guys. Got to drop off now. Call with Kevin C in 18 minutes.
You're not supposed to type in yourself, though.
This guy, his name is George Brown, and he says, "Give my best to Rod. I had the pleasure of contributing a sidebar in his light sport book." So,
What's his name?
George Brown.
Yes, yes, of course. Here's
Yeah, so I wanted to point that one out.
Very
Okay,
nice.
so returning to flying after 3 months off has been interesting. Oddly, landing seemed to be the hardest part. What advice would Rod offer to get back to acing those landings?
Yeah, here's my advice. Getting back to landings typically means that most people, when they approach and they've been away from flying for a while, to them, airspeed is life. And what that means is the more of it, the more life you have. And that's not quite correct. That's a misconception. That's like believing that the Iron Age was a time when people wore neatly pressed clothing. That's just not true. The deal is flying at a speed that's about 30% above the airplane's stall speed for the present configuration means that you're pretty much right at the bottom of the drag curve. And what that means is that as you increase the angle of attack for flare, the induced drag increases, and therefore the airplane doesn't want to float, and therefore probably bounce, and so on. The airplane just starts to decelerate. Number two, I have 2 videos on YouTube under Rod Machado. One is called The Runway Expansion Effect, and the other one is called Knowing Where to Look When You Flare. And this was an observation I made about 10 years ago. It just blew me away. It's basically because I'm lighter now than I was 10 years ago, by stroke of luck. And what I find is that as I've gotten older, my peripheral vision has decreased. I used to have wonderful peripheral vision. Now it's kind of like this. I don't get much visual acuity beyond this area right here. As a flight instructor, whenever I'd flare the airplane, I would just use my peripheral vision, peripheral cues, to tell me whether I'm near the attitude or near the runway for flare. I could sense what's going on out here, just like most experienced pilots would. So I've gotten older, I can't do that. What I had to do was revert back to what I teach students to do when they first start landing. And that is look to the left of the nose of the airplane, where to the left of the cowling, to the right of the window stub, and right where I can see the horizon, and I can see the runway. So I see the runway and the horizon up here. I get both of things that I need. And that way I can sense runway depth perception, closure rate, and attitude. And because I was starting to land hard, for lack of a better phrase. And then I couldn't figure out, I've been doing this for years. Why am I landing so hard and not being able to make a smooth landing? I just tried that and reverted back to the way I teach students, and changed everything. For people that are older, typically above, I'm going to say older is more than 50 years old, but if your peripheral vision is decreasing like it does after 50, then you might consider doing that. And look at the videos on YouTube, though. That's a very important thing. 2 of those videos under Rod Machado.
Excellent. So we're now at about an hour in, and some people get upset that if we run over an hour, and we don't run over an hour, but we're going to stay here and answer questions for as long as people have questions, honestly, that we're interested in. And let me say, you join us, please, for our next Don't Get Rusty, which will be September 10th, as always, at noon Eastern. And the topic which I will be presenting on is 60 seconds to a perfect landing. I mean, how is that for a promise, right? We're promising you a perfect landing. So we want to see you in a month, okay? But don't go away. We're going to stay here with Rod and answer questions for some time longer. And so I imagine, Pablo, do you have the next question?
I do. And I think just to promote that, Keith, is I think we're going to take about, what's our X factor? I think it's 10 minutes per second. So in an hour, we'll tell you how to do a 60-second landing.
Excellent. Yeah. If you only got one thing, you want to stretch that out, which is pretty much my strategy.
Not going to work. Okay, so Mariana, a 16-year-old flight student, says, I'm 16, flight student, hi Rod, at SUT in North Carolina. I'm struggling with landing a lot, bold. I've been flying since I was 12 and still having issues. I'm in a Cessna 152. Any tips on how landing can be easier? I'm also taking your class from NDCDE. I love it.
Okay, yeah, and his name was what? I didn't get the name.
This was Mariana.
Mariana, yes. Okay, consider this by way of explanation, or by way of short story. When Fred Wick created the air coupe. It doesn't have rudder pedals. You land in a crab configuration. It has spring gear. If you're landing in a crab configuration because of crosswind, the spring gear straightens the airplane out. So you just fly it down in the crab, touch down on the runway, the airplane will straighten out and you lower the nose. All right, think about this. No rudder pedals, just yoke and throttle. That's it. And it has brakes, of course. Fred Wick was able to solo students in 4.6 hours in the air coupe. And this was back in the 1930s, 4.6 hours. And again, by example, I taught somebody to fly in the air coupe. Actually, I've worked with several people in the air coupe, but I taught one person, ab initio, no experience in aviation whatsoever. But he was an ex-Green Beret, so he's always cool no matter what. You couldn't phase this guy. But I soloed him in 4.7 hours in the air coupe at a tower-controlled airport. So he was familiar with the radio. He knew how to work it and knew it doesn't matter where you point it and things like that. You got to point it toward your mouth. So why? How come it takes 40 hours for some people to learn to land an airplane, and yet Fred Wick, his average was 4.6 hours? And here's the reason. If you didn't have to worry about the rudders, then you're coming down to land. All you have to worry about is establishing the attitude, trimming, and then wait to the point where the airplane, you should begin the flare. So you know where to look, and you use, in one of the videos that I have on YouTube, it's called the runway expansion effect. You use that, you use you knowing where to look, and also the fact that you know what the attitude is for flare. If you've ever driven a truck or an SUV, it's almost at the same attitude, not for the roundup, but for the flare. The attitude is about the same when you actually get down close to the ground, within about a foot above the ground. You're at the same altitude, I should say. I didn't want to say attitude, but you're at the same altitude above the ground. So you know what that looks like when you look out the window as you're driving. These clues are all available to you. But why did Fred Wick allow them to, or students solo in 4.6 hours? And the reason is they didn't have to use rudders. What does that tell you? They just flew attitude, came down, flared, things like that, but they didn't have to use rudders. So if you don't have to use rudders, you'll be able to land a lot sooner, or learn to land a lot sooner. What that means is people who have trouble landing have difficulty maintaining the airplane's attitude, the proper attitude, and its longitudinal, the airplane's longitudinal axis relationship with the runway center line, keeping the airplane nose aligned if there's no crosswind, or keeping it at a slight angle if there is a crosswind. And you need rudders to do that. Ultimately, rudders keep control of the point the nose where it's supposed to go. Ailerons used to keep the wings level. If you don't master rudders before you start landing, or you don't feel good with that, it'll take longer to land. And that's my response to that. Plus Rod, the videos on YouTube.
And also, just to throw a tip that I know that you gave me, Rod, is that perhaps it might help her too to do some of the low approaches as well to start getting that longitudinal alignment down.
Yes, yes, exactly. I'm sorry. I'm so thoughtful of other people. I was offering you some water here in case you wanted it. I feel like you guys are so close.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'll have one of those. But yeah, it's really not too difficult in this. I've always been amazed why it takes people so long to land. This is amazing, and it's not because I'm a great instructor. My students don't take long to learn to land. It's just that you have to apply the principles of attitude flying, and you need to learn how to control the airplane right from the get-go. And sometimes it really works to your benefit to go out for an hour with an instructor and just make low approaches along the runway, you know, at 6 feet above the runway height. Let the instructor control the throttle. You keep the airplane where it's supposed to be, nose straight, wings level, or at a crab angle. And, you know, I guess one last thing. When we had what was the Corey Lytle crash with the SR-22, remind me, if this was the case. Remember in the Hudson where he made the 180-degree turn, hit the building? Well, we don't normally have experience avoiding things. Keith, you would, because of the aircraft you flew in the military, but we don't have experience avoiding things as we're approaching them in the air. We don't understand closure rates and things like that. And one of the reasons for the Corey crash. Well, in an airplane, you don't have experience with runway closure rates until, of course, you actually get down and start landing, right? And think about this. If you think about it from this perspective, it's amazing we can learn to land based on this observation. One, out of a 6-minute circuit in the traffic pattern, about 15 seconds is spent in the attitude where you're actually approaching the runway and need to flare. That's where the magic happens, but it happens very quickly. And so we make 15 seconds, we make maybe 10 landings in 1 hour and 10 touch and go landings. And then that is 150 seconds. So that's 2.5 minutes and 1 hour of getting experience where it really counts. And then we do that for a couple of hours. I'm amazed that anybody can land anyway, that we learn to land that fast. So get more experience in the environment by flying where, let's say the airplane's 6 feet above the ground. Instructor controls the throttle. You keep that airplane exactly where it needs to be and watch how the control responds so it doesn't have that spook factor that we normally experience when we first start doing landings.
All right, so Pablo, what do you have next?
Okay, angle of attack indicators have become very fashionable these days. How does this instrument fit into Rod's approach to attitude flying?
Oh, you really know how to ask the right questions, Pablo. And whoever that
I'm the filter. That's what I'm here for.
I'm the filter. I want to be a filter too someday. Being filters is a good job. That's a great question. Excellent question. Okay, next question. Let's go ahead. Let's move on. And, here's the answer to your question. I am not a fan of an angle of attack indicator. Not at all. You do not need one in a general aviation airplane. If you want to put one in there, fine, good. More power to you. I mean, if you need another instrument to plug up the hole where the ADF was removed in your airplane, great, put one in there. Do you need one to fly an airplane safely? No, people have been flying airplanes safely for years without an angle of attack indicator. And there have been 4 major studies on angle of attack indicators over the past 20 years, 4 of them, not one. And I'm going to repeat that, not one has offered any conclusive evidence that having an angle of attack indicator in an airplane makes you safer and makes you less likely to stall an airplane. Not one. And the Pegasus study was the last study done, and I think they paid a lot of money for that study, and all due respect to the people that did it, I could only find one salient point in the Pegasus angle of attack study, and that was, as I quote, and I'll read it from memory, we've determined that a pilot using an angle of attack indicator can fly a stabilized approach for the last 20 seconds on final approach. In other words, you can ensure stability of the approach with the angle of attack indicator. Yeah, well, I got news for you. I have 15-hour students that can fly a stabilized approach without using an angle of attack indicator. Angle of attack indicators are, I think we look for the next big thing to keep people safe in an airplane, but you know what? Angle of attack indicators drain your visual resources. And when you are stumped or frightened or distracted by some element of threat, let's say, in an airplane, and you're overshooting the runway and you're trying to look at the runway center line, you're worried about overshooting and something distracts you, you're not looking at the attitude indicator. You're looking at the thing that's scaring you. And this is how people get themselves into stalls, along with a lack of skill and basic rudder usage. And the better source would be to have something that lets you know you're approaching a stall from an audio point of view. In other words, a sound, something that, oh yeah, the stall horn. It'd be great if we actually had a stall horn in the airplane that, oh wait, we actually have a stall horn. You know what the FAA said when they did NASA did a study many years ago? NASA said, you can see I get excited about this, right? I try to calm down. NASA said in 75% of the stall spin accidents where airplanes, the pilots have actually survived the stall spin accident, the pilot did not recall the stall horn going on in most, or activating, or the stall light, but it was the stall horn that was referenced here. And you can bet it probably did.
I have a comment on that. I mean, I agree with your overall principle, but when AOA indicators first started coming out, I was a fan. And the reason because is flying Navy jets, we flew angle of attack. But there's a huge difference that I realized. And the difference is that the weight of our airplane could be vastly different depending on where you're landing.
Yes,
so
yes.
AOA works then, but you know, with the planes that we fly, they stall at the same airspeed pretty much within a couple knots, and so there's no reason for the AOA.
You are now my new best friend again. Go to that other guy,
back on top, Chris.
Yeah, you are back on top, because that is so true. It's how much did your Navy jet weigh? Go ahead, say it. I dare you. Don't deny it.
Oh, like you know, like 30 some odd thousand pounds.
Oh, okay, great. It's got the word 1,000 in it, and that's the key right there. And the reason that's important is it's hard to sense what an airplane's doing with that much weight. Not in a general aviation airplane. And I would ask pilots this in my seminars. I'd find out who the 747 captains were that were general aviation pilots, and that was the key. And then I asked them, if I were to cover up your airspeed indicator in this airplane, could you fly this airplane? And most of them said yes. They said yes because they had attitude flying skills and they could still sense the airplane. But let's face it, it's much harder to do in a bigger airplane. General aviation airplanes don't need that. And by the way, your airspeed indicator and based on what you said, Keith, your airspeed indicator in a 1G condition or in less than 45 degree, a 30 degree bank, I'll use that number. Your airspeed indicator is almost a direct representation of what your angle of attack would be, assuming that you made you plotted it out 90 knots at max gross weight. 90 knots is this angle of attack, 80 knots is this angle of attack, and what have you. There's almost a direct relationship there, assuming you're not pulling more than 1G. Pull more than 1G, more than the G's, 1.14 in a 30 degree bank, then that calibration starts to go away. Not only that, but the draw on the elevator control also is a direct relationship to the angle of attack. And by the way, that's why the Aircoup was an airplane that you couldn't stall. And heavens knows I tried. It couldn't stall because Fred Wick limited the amount of aft draw. And this, by the way, is another reason why, or a reason why students that I've had in the past who were pregnant couldn't stall the airplane. That is a matter of fact. Because in the 150, they just couldn't pull it back. And the male analog of that would be is if you have a beer belly, you're probably one of the safest pilots out there found in terms of stalls. So the FAA should advocate drinking beer, eating pizza for all males to reduce the stall potential and decrease your insurance rate too. But I'm sorry. This is what happens when I'm left alone without adult supervision. Yeah. No affront to you, my good friends.
No, we've never claimed to be adults or experts. So following up on that one, someone just asked, when you talk about pitch or altitude and power, isn't the AOA indicator a better representation of reserve lift and attitude when trying to avoid a stall?
So what? No, my response is, with no disrespect to the yes. Oh, it's yes, of course, reserve lift. But why is that of any more value, in my opinion, since you have to look at it and you should be looking outside when you're making an approach to land? Why is that any more value than the 5 other indications that you're approaching the critical angle of attack? Seat of the pants feel, the sound the airplane makes, the airspeed indication, the kinesthetic sense of motion, and the feel on the controls. And whether you realize or not, most airplanes have stick shakers too. Yeah, I'm really stick shakers. That's normally the instructor in the right seat saying, let go, let go. So that's what I mean by stick shaker. Hey, by the way, just as an aside, Rich Stoll's book, Stall Awareness, he made a very interesting point about this. And Rich said a stick shaker is a far more effective stall awareness mechanism than a horn, a light, or an angle of attack indicator. He said it's the best. Well, actually, he didn't say angle of attack indicator. He said horn or light. And we don't have stick shakers on small airplanes, do we? Maybe someday someone will invent one. And by the way, at the Founders Prize, EAA's Founders Prize 8 years ago, there was a gentleman there who offered a stick shaker that fit on the control column, and when the airplane got close to stall, it would shake the column, which I thought was a novel idea. Simple, easy to use, and a very valuable thing to have in an airplane.
Hey, Rod, we have a question here. I'm going to jump in because it's kind of one of the things we sort of promised. Of course, they say great webinar like always, but it says, what are a good set of maneuvers to perform in the practice area to maintain proficiency if you do not get to fly often?
Oh, what a great question. Great question. Excellent question.
Now, real quick, before we continue, real quick.
Go ahead, Pablo. I have an answer for you, by the way. And it's.
I've actually got this question a lot again. I think people joined late because there's a lot of people on this one.
Yes.
is, will I see this again? Will it be a recording? How will I get it? All that stuff. Can we make a quick reference to that, please, Stephen or Keith? Or...
Oh, yes, of course. I love to do that because we are going to be on the AOPA Live YouTube channel in about 24 hours. This whole webinar will be completely recorded and posted for your viewing pleasure for as long as many times as you want to.
There you go. Thank you.
Excellent. And they're going to use the video enhancement on my image there. So that'll be better for everybody involved. Yeah, great question. And here's my answer to that question. There's one maneuver I can have you do, other than flying the traffic pattern, by the way, which is, look, I've been flying for 50 years and teaching for 48. And, you know, I've got all those hours that you get from teaching students 1 hour at a time. And you know what I love to do? I love to go fly the traffic pattern. I love to teach, but I love to fly in the traffic pattern because it's a great assessment of your skills. Get that off here. It's a great assessment of your skills, but it requires an application of all the little things you learn everywhere else. Believe it or not, you do a Shondell in the traffic pattern if you plan it right. Going from crosswind to downwind, you have to lower the nose if you get the altitude right, and lower the nose and roll out at the same time. It's kind of like a combination Shondell and Lazy 8, and I find that interesting because it's a great way to assay or test your skill. But the way I do it in the practice area is this: one maneuver you have to do in practice, and if you do it, you can really test your chops and improve your chops too. And that is, start from cruise, go right, pull the power back, carpet, power back, however you have it in your airplane. Slow the airplane down to flight at minimum controllable airspeed. If you don't want to go down to minimum controllable airspeed, because that apparently is an anathema now, according to the FAA, there's no longer a reference to minimum controllable airspeed in the airplane flying handbook, by the way. They got rid of it. And but go down, slow down till you hear the stall horn or see the stall light. You're about 5 to 7 knots above stall. And then add enough power aggressively, but not too aggressively, to hold that attitude and maintain that altitude. And then go back into straight and level flight, doing the same thing, all the while holding altitude. Then try it by adding flaps as you slow down, minimum controllable airspeed, maximum flaps, hold that altitude. And then if you really want to up the ante here, start a turn at a 20-degree bank. Start 10, then go to 20, keep the airplane coordinated, and see if you can hold altitude at minimum controllable airspeed. Man, you've got that throttle all the way in. It's passed through the firewall because you're trying to get as maximum power as you, it's not passed through the firewall. Don't write that down. It is the way to test to see how well you can control the airplane. And then if you want, you can actually start a climb at minimum controllable airspeed. Never going to happen in a 150, but you can start a descent, which is my 150 specialty, and you can start the descent at minimum controllable airspeed, go down to an altitude, level out. That is an insanely great way to see how well that you fly the airplane. If you can do that, you've got some serious skill. So that's what I recommend. And,
what else, Pablo? We got time for a couple more questions.
Yeah, all right, we'll do a couple more here. So
I'll go for as long as you like. So
okay,
I'm giving up eating. I find it to be much more fun being here.
So when you were talking about covering up instruments, someone says it's difficult to determine flap speed and gear speed with the airspeed indicator covered.
Don't use flaps then, or use flaps. You know, like in a 150, when you get down to 90 knots, use flaps and then cover up the instruments. Just don't add any more power. Yeah, a good point, a good question, but not something that you need to worry about if you just do it like I said it.
Okay. How about nighttime unusual recovery training? Comment. Okay, I'm just reading them the way they're asked, so there's no comments and stuff. It says, how about nighttime unusual recovery training? Comment with little ground visual references.
Yeah, well, that's why we wear a view limiting device, right? So day or nighttime doesn't make that much difference. And yeah, you can detect shadows and clues more easily during the day, but I think you know, the unusual attitudes can be practiced during the day and expect the efficacy to apply at night. So that's what I would do. Although I have to say this, you know, the best way to teach somebody unusual attitudes I found, and I was shocked when I first tried this, when we're talking about wearing a view limiting device, right? Goggles or a hood, although you can make the case that the airplane is a view limiting device, especially if you fly 195. Can't see anything out of that airplane. But the deal is that I put the hood on them and then I have them close their eyes.
Yep.
Just have them fly the airplane. Do you guys do that too?
Yep, I've done that too. Yeah, just have them close their eyes and give me a turn, and it's amazing what they end up doing.
Yeah, what's amazing is I've had students that were able to fly that way and somehow or another managed to fly with their eyes closed. I'm thinking, how are they doing that? I don't know. Maybe I should make them wear earplugs so they don't get any sensory clues. But anyway, for most students though, they end up being so discombobulated and they're controlling the airplane, which adds to the confusion when you say, okay, look outside, because what they think's happening is not what's happening. So
right.
Yeah, I don't know if it makes that much difference at night. Although I do have to say it's a lot spookier at night. And this is why flying or getting in the barony chair, the FA's barony chair, is a very, very important thing to do. Have you folks ever ridden in one of those things for
No.
FA? Yeah, really? Yeah, I have, and I logged it. So they spin you around and you're supposed to tell, they have you lift up, move your head in a few different directions, and then you look up and you are totally confused. And hopefully you don't stay that way for too long.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing example. So, okay,
Cool.
but training at night in unusual attitudes is great too. Perfectly fine, and do it.
Okay.
All right, Pablo, next.
What is the definition of stabilized approach?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And basically it's an approach where the airspeed, the descent rate, and the airplane's trajectory remain within specified limits. Now, for large multi-engine airplanes, the FAA says 500 feet per minute. The plus or minus, I think 5 knots on the, or 10 knots on the airspeed indication. And so I'm not sure they offer a specific number for small airplanes in terms of stabilized approaches, but those three things, altitude, airspeed, and trajectory, are constant and don't change to any great degree. That's what it would mean. And unless you folks add to that, help me out here, because I don't think they have any specific definition for general aviation airplanes. I do know they offer that. Individual companies offer that specifically for their airlines, and it varies. It's not all the same. But I will say this: if an airplane, if I had that video to show, I would show you what a stabilized approach is. That the airplane the attitude is set on final approach. The airplane's lined up with the runway, and very, very little is changing. Even in extreme, excuse me, let me watch my words here properly. Even in a turbulent condition, you can maintain a reasonable facsimile of the airspeed if you maintain the attitude, because it'll move, depending on the gust that you're receiving, but it'll eventually come back or center on the airspeed that's associated with the attitude and the power setting. So
well, that's where I'm going to pitch my next webinar, 60 Seconds to a Perfect Landing, because one of the things we demonstrate is how very little, once you get it stabilized, how very little the control inputs are. And I think one of the biggest problems a lot of people have on landing is over controlling the aircraft.
Right.
Yeah, that's very true. And this is where the Weber's law comes into effect too, because if you have a Tibetan death grip on the controls, and forgetting that you may be using the Tibetan death chants, then you have no sense of how much you're actually pulling on the control. Keeping a lighter grip on the controls is important. I don't use 2 fingers because that means fewer sensory inputs. There you go. Here we go. I don't use 2 fingers. And can somebody make my screen wider? And with 2 fingers, there's limited sensory input. When you put all your fingers, there's more sensory input because you have more nerves connected to the yoke. You just can't squeeze hard, because then you lose the ability to, from a tactile point of view, to measure how much pressure you're applying. So that's important. Light grip, full grip, and that also helps with the.
And one of the keys, I think, that too, is it's like that key of getting it set up early, because if you're behind on the downwind when you're pulling the power and base, then it just makes the final more difficult. And then getting that light touch with trimming it and everything, is critical, and it's like learning how to trim and let go. And in fact, I know one thing I learned that I share with my students too early on is that if the airplane's doing something weird, relax what you're doing because it's probably you.
Yes, yes.
It's like usually the airplane just wants to fly, and so
Yeah,
learning
exactly.
that, get that
Because
light
the
touch.
airplane knows how to fly, basically.
Yep.
It was built to fly. And by the way, Keith, can you, it's a good point, very, very good point, Chris. Keith, can you allow me to screen share for a second to show that one video?
Sure.
Because I think it's very instructive. This is a stabilized approach if you can do it.
Okay, we can try that. Let's see.
Okay, here we go. And it's actually bigger than in the real airplane. It's amazing. And here's the turn to base. Now, again, look, everything's predicted. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm turning base. The power is brought back to flight idle. And I know that scares some people, but power off landings should be all the rage, but they're not. And let's see, there's the attitude. I've trimmed it up, hands off flying. Look, Mom, no hands. I don't do this with passengers in the airplane, by the way, and raising the hands. But now there's the attitude. This airplane is perfectly stabilized. I'm turning. The attitude is right exactly where I want it to be. The airspeed 70 knots. Now it's going to be 65 knots. For this airplane, there's the rollout. I've called the tower to have him activate the runway centerline widening device. I've added a little bit of nose up trim and took a little bit away. The airplane's now trimmed for hands off line. The airspeed 65 knots. I'm looking and just making sure there's nobody. Look, you got to look for traffic here, folks. And the Vasi lights are white, but I don't understand that because they were red the last time I landed. So. And the hands off flying right there, and the airplane's lined up with the center line. This is a stabilized approach. Vertical speed is fixed, and you'll just watch the runway expand here. Not now, but right there. And that told me I needed to flare. There's the runway center line, and bingo. The magic word I learned in church, bingo. And that's how that works.
All right,
So,
I'll take that back. All right, cool.
One thing,
well,
and if I can just comment on the video real quick too, one of the things I noticed too that I've noticed recently as an instructor with people helping get stabilized as well is the pitch attitude. When you're on downwind turning base and turning as well, I've noticed that sometimes pilots will put the nose down or pick it up during a turn, which then throws their airspeed off. But if you look in your video, too, consistent during the turns and on base, that helps to keep the airspeed stabilized as well.
No, that's a great observation. And here's why. When people make a left turn from a downwind to base, they're looking over the center of the cowling. They're not looking straight ahead. They're looking over the center of the cowling. They shift their vision, and what they see is the right side of the cowling raise above the horizon, and they lower the nose. This is why, for proper attitude flying in a turn, you look not over the center of the cowling. You look directly ahead of where you are, and you pick a 3 inches. Let's say the horizon's 3 inches above the above the cowling, and for all your turns that aren't too steep, then you maintain that attitude for a turn. Keep the horizon line 3 inches above the cowling, right over the center of where you're sitting, not over here. Don't look that way. Don't look that way, and you'll be able to maintain a precise attitude. When you start descending, pull the power back. You got a new attitude now. Maybe it's 4 inches. That's your turning attitude. It's a great observation, though, and that's part of attitude flying. So
excellent. Well, I think Pablo has one last question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. All right. So someone says, wait, that's it. Okay. So someone was asking about Dutch rolls for rudders, for rudder use. Is that a good training technique?
It's an excellent technique. It's actually called a coordination roll. A Dutch roll is something a swept wing jet aircraft does that is a maneuver you don't want to do. All right, because it's a stability problem in a jet aircraft. So what we do is more properly called a coordination roll, which kind of sounds like something you get at a sushi place. I'll have a California roll and a coordination roll while you're at it. Comes in the shape of a little, never mind, I'm sorry, I go carried away. But adult supervision again, but coordination rolls are very, very effective. And you put the nose on the horizon and you pick an attitude or a reference directly ahead of you. And the roll is to the right and to the left, about 20, 30 degrees of bank. And you keep the nose perfectly aligned with that reference directly ahead of you. And it works out very, very well. Don't worry about keeping the ball in the inclinometer centered, because it may not remain centered depending on where the inclinometer is placed in the airplane. And I flew a light sport airplane with an inclinometer that was way up in the top left-hand corner off to the left. And when you roll, the ball would be thrown off to the right and to the left. It wasn't a problem when you're established in the turn, but when you roll, you could never get a coordination on that. But you can look directly over the nose and see that.
Cool.
And that's how it
Excellent.
works.
All right. Well, Rod, we thank you so much for joining us on this webinar. We had a great time, as always. And, we were thinking about going to a more serious format, but, obviously it just didn't work out today.
It never does. Don't even try.
All right. Anyway,
that means my plan was effective. So, no, but
right,
thanks.
so, yeah,
And by the
certainly.
way, just one more thing, if I may add. Remember the letters AOPA. AOPA, obviously, though that is the code for the discount of 25% off anything on my website for the next 3 days. AOPA. Put the product in your cart, go to checkout, put AOPA in the discount window. It's 25% discount on anything that I have in the store. And I'm getting pretty hungry too, so I'm gonna have to go to good stuff.
Well, we thank you. We thank you for that. And if you want to see the recording, it's going to be on the AOPA Live YouTube channel within about 24 hours. So, Stephen,
nice.
if you would jump in and end the webinar for us, we'll call it a day. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks you guys for being such a great host. And you kicked Pablo off, but he deserved it. So folks are just wonderful folks. AOPA should be proud to have you. It's just a real pleasure working with you.
Thank you, Rod.
Thank you.